Speaking of, at number 5, the Morrigan. And may I add, this particular Celtic mythological deity is absolutely awesome in the heavy metal, death and destruction kind of sense, as well as being one of the most interesting figures in the culture of the British Isles. The Morrigan, which is thought to have been derived from the Proto-Celtic as Morrigan, roughly translating to Great Queen, Phantom Queen, or Queen of Phantoms. She is mainly associated with war and fate, especially with the foretelling of doom, death and victory in battle, and through this role she is often depicted as a crow. For those that were fated to die in battle, she would appear as a beautiful maiden beside a riverbank, washing the bloodstained clothes of those awaiting death. The Morrigan is also often described as a trio of individuals, in particular 3 sisters, who are oftentimes referred to as the 3 Morrigan. The Bad, the Macha and the Naaman, representing each aspect of death, fate and glory in victory. In later folklore, the Banshee was thought to be derivative of the Morrigan, and in the Welsh Arthurian legend, she was thought to be linked to the legendary Morgan Le Fay. In most respects, the Morrigan is terrifying, but she's also awesome. Coming in at number 4, Dionysus, who, fun fact, was Jim Morrison's favourite Greek mythological figure, probably because of all the wine, because as we all know, the man could sink his fair share of carouse. Nevertheless, if you couldn't tell, Dionysus was the god of grape harvest, winemaking and wine, of fertility, religious ecstasy and theatre. Doesn't sound scary at all, right? Well, in actual fact, Dionysus was an incredibly horrifying deity, mainly due to his propensity to incite ritual madness and the fact that he had more cults worshipping him than you could shake an olive branch at. Now, don't get me wrong, Dionysus served an incredibly important role in the development of Greek culture and theatre, and for the most part, his ritualistic worship served as the main driving force of Greek enlightenment and spiritual liberation. However, it was the flip side to that coin that gave the rest of his worship a pretty bad name. Dionysus was often depicted as a dying and rising god, and during one particular encounter with the Elder Titans, his throat was slit, he was skinned alive and his flesh roasted and eaten for dinner. This led to a number of his female-focused cults adapting the ritualistic sacrifice of tearing dissenters to pieces with their bare hands, mimicking the death of Dionysus and often resulting in cannibalism. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that was the intended result. Swinging in at number 3, Kali. I mean, you kind of only need to take one look at Kali and you'll realise how absolutely terrifying she actually is. Kali, also known as Kalika or Shyama, is the Hindu goddess of time, creation, destruction and power, and for the most part she is perceived as the kindest and most loving of all the Hindu deities and is regarded by her devotees as the mother of the whole universe. She has an absolutely massive variety of forms, often appearing as a benevolent cloaked mother that protects her devotees and children from various mishaps and misfortunes. But because of this interpretation of Kali being a fierce protector of her children, it's kind of led to another pretty terrifying physical depiction, mainly in the form of her eternally clutching a severed head, which signifies the human ego being slain by divine knowledge, as well as the fact she often wears a skirt made of human arms and a garland of more human heads adorned happily around her neck. Kali is pretty much always shown with fiery red eyes, intoxicated by the absolution of rage, and is often shown standing atop of Shiva himself, clutching a multitude of blood-soaked swords in her numerous arms, asserting her complete and utter dominance over him and everything else in the universe. If you haven't figured out by now, it would not be wise to piss off Kali. Also, she travels around on her pet lion, so yeah, you've been warned. Next up at number 2, Ishtar. Also known as Inanna, Ishtar is a fertility goddess of love and war, originally worshipped in ancient Mesopotamia and Sumer before gaining prevalence in Acadia, Babylon and Assyria, where she became their most beloved god, surpassing even their progenitor god Ashur. It is often thought that Ishtar later influenced the Phoenician goddess Astarte and thus later influenced the development of the Greek goddess Aphrodite, albeit a much more watered down version. Because let's not beat about the bush, Ishtar was super messed up. They say that there are 2 Eternals in creation, sex and death, and Ishtar encapsulated both of them. Whereas she was the goddess of love, she was also the goddess of war and chaos, so much so that in ancient Mesopotamia the art of battle itself was often referred to as the dance of Inanna. As Ishtar's mythos developed across ancient civilization, her depiction of death and violence became much more prevalent, and she was gradually referenced as the progenitor of genocide, ultra-violence, cult-like worship of death and the ritualistic sacrifice of children in her name. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Ishtar was the major antagonist in tempting Gilgamesh to submit to become her lover, which he refuses, and in turn Ishtar threatens to break into hell itself and unleash an entire army of the dead to feast upon the world. Yeah, Ishtar is not playing any games at all. And finally, our number 1 spot, Zeus. I'm going to preface this point with one simple statement. Zeus is messed up, man, and it kind of comes with the territory when you take a look at this guy's origin and the fact that his titan/father Cronus ate all of his children alive after chopping off his own father's genitalia and throwing it in the ocean after fearing that the same thing would happen to him. Yeah. The exception being Zeus himself, who was hidden in a cave by his mother and replaced with a rock, who then broke all of his siblings out by slashing open his Titan father's stomach, freeing them to reign back across the planet and becoming the king of the gods of Mount Olympus that we all know today. Also, despite the fact that Zeus pretty much roamed around for the rest of existence, fornicating with everything that moved, his own sisters/wives included, he was also just straight up out of order when it came to humanity. In the legend of Prometheus, the demigod took one look at humanity down below and thought, those guys look pretty cold, let's give them some fire. And what was Zeus's response? He was so mad that he chained Prometheus to a rock where an eagle would swoop down every day to gorge at his liver, which would then later regenerate for eternity. Also, in the whole Pandora's box incident, it was completely Zeus's fault, although he never gets the blame. He himself blessed Pandora with insatiable curiosity to beguile humanity, and then gave her a box, and then told her to never open that box. He knew exactly what would happen, and everyone blames Pandora. Told you he was messed up. Kicking off at number 5, Sekhmet. And this is the first time that we're heading down into the underbelly of ancient Egyptian mythology with one of its lesser known deities, but also perhaps its most violently ferocious. Now, it's no kept secret that the ancient Egyptians had a bit of a thing for death and disembowelment, but that particular torturous method of pain is best reserved for the legendary deity Sekhmet, the fiercest huntress amongst all of the Egyptian divinities. Sekhmet was often depicted as a lioness, and she was bestowed upon the titles the one before whom evil trembles, mistress of the dead, lady of slaughter, and she who mauls. That's a pretty hefty resume, right? But nevertheless, she's a badass. Sekhmet was a solar deity and thus fell under the order of Ra, king of all the Egyptian gods. As the legend goes, Sekhmet was sent by Ra to kill a cabal of demons that were still lurking within the kingdom of Egypt, as well as their numerous mortal cults and secret orders who had instigated countless wars and other forms of discord upon mankind. Well, it turned out that Sekhmet had a thing for spilling blood, and with the first sign of battle, she fell into an animalistic frenzy, causing so much death, destruction, and bloodshed that the Nile itself overflowed in a crimson red. And because of her blood-based environmental disaster, Ra forced her to clean it up and swallow all of the blood in the Nile, subsequently kicking off a 1,000-year tradition of warriors getting punch drunk on red wine after every great battle. What a legacy. Swinging in at number 4, Baron Samedi. And we're swinging over to the mythology of the lower of Haitian voodoo for this one, with perhaps their most infamous orchestrator of the dead, Baron Samedi. Now, although there are copious lower deities, the principal chief of the dead is this guy, who holds a certain chaotic reverence over the comings and goings of the living and the dead. Also known throughout his numerous incarnations as Baron Cimetière, Baron Le Croix, and Baron Criminel, Samedi is often depicted dressed in a top hat with a black tailcoat, dark or lensless glasses, and cotton plugs in his nostrils, as if to resemble a corpse dressed and prepared for burial in the traditional Haitian style. He is brash, rude, fond of rum and tobacco, but also has a roguelike charm to him and an incredibly wild sense of humor. It is often said that the Baron Samedi spends most of his time in the invisible realm of voodoo, found at the mystical crossroads between the worlds of the living and the dead. For any soul that passes freely from this world, Baron Samedi has a freshly dug grave ready and waiting for them, and it's his business in ensuring that all corpses rot in the ground to stop any soul from being brought back as a brainless, flesh-hungry zombie. After all, it's an important job, and someone's got to do it. Cheers, Baron Samedi. Next up at number 3, Rangda. Yeah, how could we make this list without referencing perhaps the most evil force in the whole of the South Pacific, Rangda, the demon queen of the Layaks. Now, in Balinese mythology, the Layaks are a horrifying race of humanoid monstrosities that take the form of a grotesque flying head seeping with human entrails, the heart, the lungs, and the liver. In mythology, they were thought to be humans who had practiced black magic and cannibalism in the name of their queen, the widow witch Rangda. She often takes the form of a wretched, mostly nude old woman with a long tangle of hair, claws, fangs, and bulging red eyes. Rangda serves in direct opposition to the king of the spirits and leader of all the goodness in the world, Barong, and she eternally pits herself against him, orchestrating her army of evil witches and layaks to spread corruption, death, and destruction across the mythology of Balinese Balinese folklore. However, it is often thought that Rangda may also be closely associated with the Hindu goddess Durga, the fierce, often violent warrior mother that descends upon those that have wronged her with chaos and destruction. And because of that, Rangda is sometimes worshipped as a protectorate force in certain parts of Bali. Nevertheless though, she is pretty damn terrifying. Coming in at number 2, Nycneven. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty biased on this one, but much like the Morrigan from our previous part 1, and despite her horrifying depiction, Nycneven is pretty damn awesome, if not the very meaning of a nightmare to those that have wronged her and her many enemies throughout mythology. Derived from the Gaelic surname Nycneven, meaning daughter of the little saint, Nycneven is a bloodthirsty queen of the fairies in Scottish folklore. She is principally related to the Irish and Scottish Fele Nemab, the festival of the dead, which is otherwise tied to Samhain, the Celtic New Year, and the darker half of the solstice. The fact of the matter is, Nycneven is a name often tied up to depict the seminal mother witch, and in Samhain her name was given amongst other powerful female deities, Satya, Bensosia, Zobania, Abundia, and Herodiana, and is thus tied in with the various practitioners of necromancy and sorcery in Celtic mythology. As the renowned poet and author Sir Walter Scott described, Nycneven rode on the storm and marshalled a rambling host of wanderers beneath her grim banner. She was a hag that rode at the head of witches, sorceresses, and elves indifferently, always emerging upon the ghostly eve of All Hallows Mass. Now, as I said at the opening of this video, modern religion gave the old ways an incredibly bad image, and because of that, Nycneven was said to be ferociously angered by her newfound enemies. But as the legendary Scottish folklorist Alexander Montgomery said, the elder Nycneven regularly feasted upon the flesh of holy men. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Perchta, which is a figure that potentially ties neatly into our previous entry Nycneven, and perhaps could even be tied into the same deity that was secretly worshipped across ancient Europe, a mysterious horned god often related to the goddess Diana, the natural deity of the moon, the hunt, and the wild. If you've never heard of the witch cult hypotheses, I definitely recommend reading up on it because it's incredibly interesting. But that's by the by, because what we're concerned with is one of its most terrifying depictions, Perchta, the arbiter of cultural taboos in alpine paganism. In many instances, Perchta was given 2 forms, that of a beautiful young woman, white as snow, or as an elderly, haggard old crone who tempted children with bright red, poisonous apples. Sound familiar? Perchta would roam the countryside and slip into homes during the dead of night, where she would find out if children and young servants of the household had been working hard all year, and if they had, they'd find a small silver coin by their bedside or in their shoe the next day. If they hadn't though, she would slit open their bellies, remove their stomachs and guts, and stuff the hole with straw and pebbles. Yeah. It is often thought though that Perchta permeated her way across the traditions of Old High German, taking many various forms and appearances. She was also thought to be the female mantle of Berchtold, a figure that was often tied to the mythical Wild Hunt, a band of mysterious demonic riders that have plagued the folklore of Europe and the British Isles for thousands of years, roaming the wild places of the world, doomed for eternity to hunt supernatural beasts and the dead. Come on guys, isn't mythology just great? Apep. And it's important to note that Egyptian mythology is incredibly vast and journeyed, and its creation myths stretch far and wide. One of the most important gods in ancient Egypt was Ra, creator of the sky, the earth, and the underworld, and the bringer of light. But of course, you can't have light without the dark, so enter this guy, Apep, the ancient Egyptian embodiment of chaos and the one true opponent of the forces of good. Also known as Apophis or Apoph, this chaotic deity often appeared in the form of a giant serpent, and his only true purpose was to bring torment and ruin to Ra in an endless battle of blood and chaos. I mean, there aren't many grey areas in this particular mythos. Apep is literally the embodiment of all evil, but it's in the great lengths that the ancient Egyptians went to combat this guy, where the grisly nature of Apep can reveal just exactly how strongly they feared him. Apep was thought to encompass the world, wrapping his coiled body around the planet just below the horizon, lurking within the lands of the dead and the underworld. To combat him, Egyptian priests would create wax models of serpents, or in many cases actually hoard live snakes and tear them to pieces in a ritualistic act of mutilation, burning their bodies in the thousands. They feared him so much that they'd carve protective spells into their dead, so that when they awoke in the underworld, they'd have a fighting chance against the evil of Apep. That's dedication. Coming in next at number 4, Hades. Because really, in all reality, we can't talk about any kind of lord of the underworld without giving credit to the true guy who hails downstairs, Hades. And no, no, not the James Woods version, because black robes and flaming blue hair aside, Hades was actually a terrifying deity in Greek mythology, so much so that the ancient Greeks even feared to speak his true name. In fact, compared to other Greek gods, little was recorded about Hades, as the ancient Greeks were terrified of marking his image in fear of attracting his attention. When offering up sacrifices to him, the Greeks would cover their faces or perform the ceremony with their eyes closed in fear of catching his gaze. There are also several stark connections to a death cult connection to Hades, a secret sect of worshippers that believe that Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, was actually the youthful form of Hades, and in the lustful practice of gluttony and indulgence, they were actually worshipping the lord of all death. Hades is an incredibly interesting figure in Greek mythology, and yet despite his terrifying reputation, he was also a pretty just and fair figure that would often give mortals the benefit of the doubt when staring down their immortal death. Or maybe he was just doing that for kicks. Yeah, it was probably that. Next up at number 3 is Izanami. And for this entry we're going over to Japanese mythology and the creation myths of the Shinto religion. Shinto is a practice of duality, of both life and death, all of which is encapsulated in the goddess Izanami no Mikoto, which means she who invites, which is a little disconcerting already, isn't it? In Japanese mythology, Izanami is the goddess of both creation and death, and she began her reign as the wife of the creation god Izanagi, where she gave birth to the many deities of Shintoism. But it's in the tale of her final birth where the horror of Izanami truly got turned up a notch. After dying during childbirth whilst giving life to the deities of the incarnations of fire, Izanami was buried in a tomb and her essence was transferred to Yomi, the shadowy land of the dead. Enraged by her death, her husband Izanagi journeyed to the underworld to find her, but couldn't, as the encroaching shadows hid her appearance. She spoke to him from behind the veil, telling Izanagi that she had already eaten the food of the underworld and couldn't leave. Izanagi straight up refused to accept this and swore never to leave her, but as he struck up a torch, the light revealed the truth of Izanami. The once beautiful and graceful form of Izanami had turned into a husk of rotting flesh with maggots and foul creatures crawling over her ravaged body. Well, as you would, her husband decided to get the hell out of Dodge, but Izanami chased after him, shrieking and cursing him for leaving her. She was so furious that she swore to reap 1,000 souls a day just to spite her previous love. Well, Izanagi replied that he would give birth to 1,500. What a comeback. Coming in at number 2, Nergal. And we're heading way back to ancient Mesopotamia, to the lands of Akkad, Assyria and Babylonia, where this guy ruled with an iron fist. Also known as Era or Era, Nergal is the ravenous god of war, plague, death and disease, and collected titles such as the Furious One and the Raging King. But to be honest, Nergal was so ridiculously powerful that he only ever waged war out of pure boredom. Initially, Nergal was the god of war, often drawn as a proto-form of Ares in Greek mythology, but in later stages he also became the god of death and the underworld. And how did he do that? He literally stormed the gates of the land of the dead with a small army of demons and took over the place by force. Well, I guess that's one way to do it. In another myth involving Nergal, one day he was feeling dull and bored, and so to spice things up a bit, he decided to just straight up attack the great city of Babylon, which was then under the protection of Marduk, the most powerful of all ancient Mesopotamian gods. Through trickery and deceit, Nergal managed to distract Marduk long enough to completely slaughter the innocent citizens of Babylon, and once his bloodlust was sated, he reassured the survivors that a great leader would soon return to protect them, so they needn't worry about dying. What the hell, dude? Talk about mind games. Yeah, out of pretty much all of the gods in mythology, this guy was the personification of watching the world burn just for the sake of it. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Czernobog. And this guy is so damn mysterious that scholars are still arguing to this day as to his true motivations in Slavic mythology. In many Eurasian proto-religions, the concept of dualism was a key theme, with light and darkness being two clear opposing forces, but were also given the same sense of worship and importance in their ritualistic understanding. Belobog, also known as the light god, was held as the progenitor of all things good in the world, but in contrast, his counterpart, Czernobog, the dark god, was seen as the orchestrator of all things bad and terrible and responsible for mortal misfortune. Now, this dualistic theme is what makes Slavic paganism so damn interesting, but nevertheless, Czernobog always lived up to his name and was ritualistically portrayed as grotesque, intimidating and accursed. But nevertheless, Czernobog always lived up to his name and was ritualistically portrayed as grotesque, intimidating and accursed, a monstrous figure that need only utter a few curses to bring complete folly to mankind. It is in the fear of the unknown where the terrifying divine potential of Czernobog truly lies, but there's actually a quiet sense of comfort in the Slavic worship of the dark god. As the Germanic priest and scribe Halmod of Passau wrote, during Slavic ritualistic feasts to appease their pantheon of gods, a bowl of potent spirits were passed around and each person would utter the names of their gods, Belobog, but most importantly also Czernobog. And it was of the utmost importance never to leave the name of the bad god out, in fear of attracting the attention of his mortal misfortune. You've got to take the rough with the smooth, after all.